Hey everyone, welcome to the Offshore Explorer podcast. I'm your host, Chase Offield. Today I'm joined by Chugey Sepulveda from the Pfleger Institute of Environmental Research. Chugey is the director and lead scientist at PIER. For the past 10 years, Chugey and his associates have been focused on working with NGOs and the federal government to establish new methods and gear for commercial swordfish harvest. All this work recently led to an authorization from the Pacific Fishery Management Council for a commercial deep-set buoy gear fleet here in Southern California. In our discussion, we go over all of PIER's scientific work, as well as the evolving recreational deep drop fishery. We chat about all things swordfish, from migration and physiology to their forage and behavior patterns. There's a lot to talk about in 90 minutes, so bear with me as I try and hit as many topics as possible. Feel free to leave us a 5-star rating and hit us up in the comments with any questions or observations. And without further ado, please enjoy the discussion. All right, episode 1, the Offshore Explorer. I have my friend Chugey Sepulveda from the Pfleger Institute of Environmental Research here, and we're going to talk swordfish today.
Thanks for inviting. It's a very timely topic.
Yeah, we're coming off a crazy 2019, the deep drop, recreational deep drop thing kind of really exploded this year.
Yeah, the guys were catching them. The conditions were right, and information flow really got out to the fleet, and before you know it, people were really targeting them. Putting in a lot of time, though, because there was a lot of guys that went and that didn't connect.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of, it's kind of like white sea bass. You got to spend your time, and then you get the guy that goes one time and connects and thinks it's real easy, but it's not always like that.
Yeah, for sure. And there were guys that were having success deep dropping prior to 2019. I think they were doing a good job keeping it quiet. And it's just funny, I think we'll get into it later, but it seemed like this year or 2019, like the way that it kind of transpired was like the perfect storm for recreational deep dropping, and we'll get into that, but it's kind of funny how it all happened. And now it's like all the rage, like it's like no one even cares about Seabass or striped marlin anymore. It's like it's all swordfish.
Well, just look at the animal. That's the reason why I've spent the last 10 years chasing that animal, is because it's definitely it's right up there in terms of challenge and size, challenge, color. They're just a bitchin' animal that can be there and you don't even know it.
Yeah, and I think, they also taste great. When you see one like up close, it's just like...
Well, it's the tease, right? So all my life, you see one at the surface, you find it, you get so excited, your heart starts thumping, you start panicking, probably trip, fall as you run to get your rod. Of course, that the hook's going to be, where's the caster for swordfish? Yeah. Everything gets all panicked, and then he doesn't bite.
Yeah.
So it's just the tease and the tease and the tease, and it happens over and over again. So then, for at least off California, it's got a lot of years building up that emotion in guys, so they really want to go out and target them now.
Prior to the deep dropping, that's the ultimate fish here. Most guys, maybe would see one or two a year when they're out marlin fishing or whatever, and scramble down, grab a bait, and get a cast on one. It's not interested. And I think the guys that have caught them on the surface, it's like a major feather in your cap.
Oh, yeah. It's like the ultimate. Right?
Yeah. But before we get into all that, give us a little background on your bio, your marine biology background and all that.
Well, I'll start from almost the beginning. I was a kid, grew up fishing here in Newport, half day, summertime, half day, morning, half day, afternoon, half day, sometimes even twilight freak, going as much as I could.
Yeah.
And went to Cal State Fullerton, got a degree in marine biology. Well, sorry, it was biology first, then I did a master's. That work was focused out in Hawaii, mainly on little tunas. After that, I got into the Scripps Ph.D. program, and my work down there really kind of set the stage, because we were looking at movement patterns and physiology of fish and really comparing them to different fisheries, especially our drift net fishery. That at the time I was really interested in that fishery, and also harpoon. So did that work, and soon thereafter I was able to get a job in Oceanside at PIER. There was an opening. It just happened to be the right time, because I was just finishing up, and that's the worst thing, that You finish your Ph.D. program, you think to yourself, I'm either going to go work on a boat or go to Kansas or wherever the job's going to take me. And landed a job right there in Oceanside, right, pretty close by where my wife had just gotten a job too. So both of us right in the same place. And that was in 2005. 2005, we finished up and been at PIER ever since.
So we kind of met, like, I don't know, a long time ago. Like,
yeah.
And
through your dad.
Yeah. And, my dad and Tom Pfleger, who started the PIER, which is the Pfleger Institute of Environmental Research, the two of them both had a passion for white sea bass. And, there was a period of time, I guess, what was it, late 90s, mid to late 90s, when the sea bass stocks were, really down here and guys were getting worried about that fish.
Yeah, I mean, rightly so. So if you're old enough to be around to see those cycles, that white sea bass, unfortunately, it definitely cycles. The population goes up, then it comes back down. It's easily hammered, and that's what's happened several times in the past.
And like when you say hammered, was that mostly from like malpractice, like commercial fishing, or what led to that kind of like downtimes?
So in the early 90s, that was an inshore net fishery that was really landing a lot of product. And then since then, we've seen other things come up. Like we have a growing fishery in Mexico. We import a lot of white sea bass from Mexico. What happens is it's a fragile fish, and that's why we have those reduced limits. I mean, tell me one other fish that we have, you can only keep one during the period of the year, because Fish and Wildlife, they know that it's fragile. Any fish that gets together to spawn and spawns in a small little aggregation spot makes them real susceptible to commercial gear, also recreational gear. One thing that a lot of people don't realize is off California, a lot of the years we land more with recreational gear than we do with commercial gear. It doesn't take a lot. Our stock's not that huge. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, it's crazy, is big white sea bass, 20 years old. So it's not like a sardine. So when you start thinking, okay, well, we're catching nothing but 40 and 50 pounders. They've been eluding us for a long time. Bottom line, though, it comes down to recruitment. So we don't always have a new stock coming, a new spawn that's actually going to fill in the next generation. We see these spikes in recruitment that happen every few years. So you may have a good few years with a lot of new recruits. That means that you got a new cohort coming through. You got a new batch of fish that you can count on. But sometimes there are years where you're only seeing 40 pounders. You're not seeing any small ones. And that's the problem with white sea bass. We don't see this consistent supply.
We could probably do a whole podcast on white sea bass. We're going to have to. But one thing that I think would be really interesting to listeners would be, and I know you guys did a study on the age, kind of like the age study on sea bass, but just quickly, like you touch on, like, I think I asked you before, how old's a 30-pound sea bass, or how old's a 50-pound or 60-pound sea bass? Like, they're pretty old, right? Like, how old's like a 50-pound sea bass?
50-pounder, I'm going to guess it depends, okay? Because a 50-pounder, at one point in time, that 50-pounder, especially, it's going to be probably a female. And if it's during the spring when they're spawning, that 50-pounder is probably going to weigh 40 pounds at the end of the summer. They can lose quite a bit of weight.
Okay.
But if it's a true 50-pounder, like in the fall or in the wintertime, that thing probably weighed 60 beforehand, and that thing was definitely over 20 years old. Wow. Probably 25. They grow pretty fast right off the start, and then they start spawning, and then they really, really slow down. And that's one of the issues we see. But it's just like swordfish, though.
Yeah.
They're pretty elusive sometimes. They can go along. They can kind of slip right by. You never even know they're there. But once the info gets out there that, hey, there's a bite happening right now, let's go, which today it travels quick.
Yeah.
And people are
social media.
People know, right? They keep it.
There's guys that are going on Instagram Live, as they're fighting a fish. And it's like, everyone's looking in the background of the video, trying to see where they are. And I've seen guys that are like, oh my God, Newport Reef's going off, and they'll like leave work, hop in their boat, and they're out there on the bite, that like an hour later.
Well, I mean, you either do that or you go tomorrow, and chances are, there's a chance that tomorrow it's not happening,
right?
And you just missed out.
Right.
Then you go spend 3 days there, and then nothing happens. You're like, man, I should have gone. I should have just called in.
Yeah, been there about 1 million times. Well, that'll make a good transition to swordfish. And you guys were, obviously really focused on sea bass, and and when sea bass were kind of in a dire situation, and you guys were integral in bringing the sea bass back to kind of a healthy stock that it is now. But what led to your transition at PIER from kind of being, more focused on white sea bass to getting into the swordfish tagging? And
I think that sea bass played a important role because we haven't really, what we've done for sea bass, we've increased the amount of info we have to manage the stock. So we haven't really done major changes, but we know the resource better now. So we know exactly what's happening. I mean, when we started, I thought white sea bass didn't move that far. I thought, maybe they slipped down to deeper water during the winter, but they can move a long ways. We have fish going down to Abre Ojos, then going all the way up to San Francisco.
Are those in your tagging? Like, those aren't separate populations, right? Like the fish that are going way up north, are they also going to Mexico? Or
what we think's happening is the northern Baja fish are related to our fish.
Okay.
So that northern Baja fish, it's the same fish that's going all the way up. And you'll have some residents that stick around 1 year, but for the most part, that's the same group of fish. And then you have fish below Punta Eugenia or Abre Ojos down there. And I do think that that's a separate group. They're smaller. There's a lot of reasons why we think that the tagging data especially. Sea bass work really got us grounded, okay? What's important? I mean, we can study fish all day long and put tags and things and figure out, this is cool. But it really led me and PIER and Tom to think about applied research.
What do you mean by that?
Like research that's actually going to go towards management, going to help the stock somehow. There's going to be some tangible, we can actually apply this. So understanding how old a fish is at its maturity, at the first of maturity, that's a real important question. That's applied science. If we're studying molas and just want to learn about how they swim, that's cool. That's someone's bag, but it might not be a fully applied research topic. So the white sea bass work really showed me that we need to figure out there's a lot of problems. If we focus on the problems and directly address those with research studies, that was a transition that we made probably in 2007.
Okay.
There was already a small swordfish tagging study at PIER when I started. They had tagged a couple individuals. And when I got hired on, that's what I wanted. That's what I really wanted to do.
And early on, when you guys were doing your tagging, how do you tag a swordfish? Or back then, at least, how were you doing it?
The best way to tag a swordfish is with a harpoon because there's minimal stress. What happens a lot of times, early on, I was focused on what swordfish do right here, not long-term migration patterns, but what are they doing right here in Southern California? You catch a fish, long line, rod and reel, you put some stress to the animal, it's going to leave. So you're not going to get real movements right away.
Oh, interesting.
But with a harpoon, put the tag in its back, oftentimes it doesn't even go down. Oftentimes you got to run it over a few times to scare it because you're afraid someone else is going to harpoon it.
Oh, crazy.
So the data you get back is probably what's happening, what the animal's really doing.
What kind of tags were you guys using back then?
Back then we were putting some of the not first generation, but early generation pop-off tags, pop-off satellite tags.
Were those like 30 day, 60 day? Or
You know what? I was doing 5-day deployments because
really?
I wanted the data back so we could look at movements. I was really keen to optimize the harpoon fishery. I'd spent so many days not connecting, looking for them at the surface, that I thought that we could take that data and figure out how we can optimize the harpoon fishery. It's clean fishery. It's fantastic. Everybody who's our age here is about 78, right?
Yeah. So I think people have really understand like a harpoon fishery is kind of like one of the most sustainable ways to commercially fish, right?
Clean.
It's like
you can't get cleaner.
There's no bycatch.
Zero. It's all directed.
Yeah.
And it's hard. And when you
it's artisanal. Like there's no mass mega harpoon boats. You know what I mean?
We can talk all kinds of smack on all fisheries out there, but you can't touch that one. You can't. There's no downside. It's like, and those captains.
So how were you, you say try to optimize the harpoon fishery. Like, what does that mean? Like,
at the time I didn't know, you talk to some guys that said, it's on the tide. They're going to float on the tide, wait for this condition, or, between 11 and 2, that's when they're going to come up. Or if the wind's blowing out of the southeast, they fit in the least, right?
Yeah. The old wise tales of, fishing that we hear.
Which sometimes curb our habits, right? They start shaping, okay, well, we're not even going to look till the tide.
Right.
I'm going to be on the bank at the tide.
Right, right.
I didn't know at the time, we didn't know to believe that or not.
Yeah.
So we were trying to use the harpoon to tag fish. First couple of years was really, really slow harpoon years too, which you have to go out a lot of times. When you do see one and you don't get them. And either way, we tagged a bunch of fish and started looking at the movements. And man, we realized right off the bat, the harpoon fishery, it's great. And there are years, like we said, 1978, everybody always talks about it. That's when every swordfish out here was flagging. There's a lot of years when they don't come up to the surface, and they don't need to. That data showed that we're looking from those few years of tagging, we had less than 10% of the time, probably closer to 8% of the time, during the day, they'd spend at the surface. So you're basically hunting for an animal that's only just 8% of the time at the surface where you could see them.
When you say there were years when there just weren't a lot on the surface, why is that? Because I can think just in my personal experience fishing, marlin fishing, some years it's guys are seeing sorties. It's guys were seeing sorties as much as marlin.
Yeah.
And then you're saying some years it's
no swordfish.
There's no swordfish. Why is that, do you think?
We're actually looking into that right now, looking at basking rates and depth and temperature. I think it has a lot to do with the depth of thermocline. When that thermocline is a little deeper, we don't see them bask as much.
Okay.
And we don't know though, because swordfish that's what's cool about them, that they can break the rules real easy. You can find them in water temperatures 85, 90, even 90 degrees. You can catch swordfish, and then you can also find them when it's 47, 52, and they're down all day long in the 40s. So it's a unique animal.
Yeah, I think that that goes into kind of the mystique of the swordfish, and why they're such a cool animal, and I think why guys are just so obsessed and get this purple fever, quote unquote purple fever. It's just a cool animal. It's a prehistoric, it's been around, and it hasn't seemingly it's kind of like a dinosaur, and I think the fact that a guy like you who has forgotten more about swordfish than most of us will ever know, still don't know. So there's so much mystery still involved around these fish, is what part of the thing that makes them so cool.
Oh yeah. They're right up there. I used to think that white sea bass were a mystery and swordfish. What's interesting about swordfish is, like I said, they can kind of do anything, but they go a long ways.
Right.
They leave here. They come here to feed during the summer months. And when they split to go spawn, they spawn in warm waters. Their eggs and larvae don't live below 24 degrees Celsius. So that's, 76 or something. So they're just like striped marlin. They're here for feed. That's it. And then when they go to leave, man, they can book it.
So
50 miles a day. So
those fish, when the swordfish are spawning and reproducing, they're not putting their eggs out here. Is that
No spawning around here.
Okay.
And actually, if you when all these wreck fish are caught, people open them up, they'll probably say, "Oh, it's a male, it's a female." It's really hard to tell because all of their gonads are really recessed. They're really small. They all look like females when they're off of our coast here.
How does someone tell a difference between a female and a male?
I'm not a good judge because I've judged several that were the opposite. You actually have to use a microscope a lot of times when the gonads are recessed and they're shrunken down. They're real small. You really got to go take them, have a histological slide made so you can actually look at underneath a microscope. Because we had a few of them that we got that we sexed as females and sent them to a lab. A buddy of ours said, "Hey man, someone wrote down the wrong information," and it was just because you can't tell at that size. When they're getting ready to spawn, though, late fall, if gonads start growing, you might be able to tell pretty easily. The females, the row's kind of a more orange color. The males, the milt's more of a whitish color, but at the same time, you can't really use those traits. If it's big, though, it's a female.
So like swordfish are like a lot of other animals, and the females are generally, the big ones are generally females, right?
Roger. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Undoubtedly. If you get one over 200 pounds, it's likely a female.
So you guys started doing these relatively short pop-off tags.
Yeah.
And then how did that lead?
We published the first manuscript on like short-term movements or fine-scale movements. And that's really when we started thinking, well, this harpoon fishery is probably not the way to go in terms of advocating some type of sustainable, healthy fishery in which guys could make a living. People could actually just imagine you're going to go mortgage a house on something that may or may not happen this year. It's just it's impossible.
And this whole thing, and I guess maybe it helps to explain to people listening, maybe you can touch a little bit, there's quotas for swordfish for the West Coast. And if the American U.S. fishermen aren't meeting that quota, then we're able to import more swordfish from, can you kind of explain?
Oh, yeah, no worries.
Because I think that
that's the part that a lot of people don't understand.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, well, maybe fortunately, there's no quota, but we are consuming a lot of swordfish.
There's no quota for swordfish.
No, so there's no exact tonnage that we can harvest or we can't harvest. Like for a lot of the tuna species, like bluefin, it's very strictly managed, right? We get so many tons. For swordfish, it's much more loose. And what happens is we eat a lot of swordfish. The U.S. consumes a ton of swordfish. I mean, literally, I could pull up the numbers, but right now, if I said them, I'd get them wrong.
Yeah.
But we only catch about 10 to 15, maybe 20% in a really, really good year. But it's probably this year, probably closer to 10% of what we consume is actually what we catch. Everything else is imported. And a lot of the reason for that is you could buy that import fish cheap, and it's coming from all over the place. Swordfish fisheries, especially South America, Taiwan, South America, Spain, a lot of big producers out there, Japan, and we can buy that swordfish pretty cheap. I've been an advocate of sustainable domestic fisheries because we know how the fish was caught. We can control the method somewhat. We don't have any long lining right now, at least as a fishery. There's no legal fishing using long line inside of 200 miles. That means that our coast has always had a relatively artisanal approach. And I know a lot of folks are always like, oh, drift nets, such an industrial gear type. But that's only a 1 mile net. And long lines anywhere from 40 to 60 miles long. So that's it's a very different type of fishery. But at the time, Pacific Council and a bunch of different groups were really beating up the net and were looking for different options. And there was a lot of worry that we weren't going to have a domestic fleet. So we started thinking of some different ideas. And I actually came up with the idea of maybe fishing deep during the day, just based on the data. It was pretty obvious. The reason why we knew that nighttime wasn't a good idea for us, at least from a commercial perspective, is that's where you have all that bycatch. Bycatch meaning other stuff.
Right.
Just
sharks and whatever.
Most of the guys at the docks, it's junk, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But blue sharks, mako sharks, I mean, there'll be a huge pain in your neck if you try to fish at night at times. Other times of the year when there's not a lot of them around, then nighttime is great because those things are right up at the surface. So that kind of led into us putting together a proposal to the federal government just to test whether or not we could target swordfish deep during the day.
When you guys came up with this proposal, there wasn't another commercial deep set buoy gear fishery really around. So you guys were kind of pioneering this method in a commercial way. Recreational guys have been deep dropping for swordfish for a long time.
Yeah, Venezuela, Florida. There's a lot of places around the world. But what we did is try to just take the information that we had from all these different fisheries. There's actually a vertical longline fishery in the South Pacific. There's off Florida, they use the shallow set nighttime buoy gear. Okay. There's no weight. It's basically a buoy and just a hook.
In Florida, they're doing that?
Yes, they were doing that before us. And but that's nighttime. It's really just like jug fishing. So it's kind of like mouse trapping where you just...
What does that mean, the mouse trap? I hear that a lot.
Mouse trap is the... and I hate that word. I don't even know why I used it, man.
But you brought it up.
I did, man. I stung myself. So that was actually what was thrown at us when we started doing this. There was a lot of concern because back in the 70s and 80s, that's how you targeted white sea bass. Okay. So it was a jug fishery where they used just a milk jug, Clorox bottle, a buoy. You have a little bit of line, and back then they were using like a Salis white iron or a tatty, and you just pinned a squid on, or sometimes no squid. You used a light iron, and you just floated these things out there. So guys were using like
So it's like the Mexican shark fishing kind of.
Yeah, very similar, except for big boats. And guys putting 40 of them out, 20 of them out, 10 of them out. A lot of them get lost because they don't cost anything. You're just basically losing your jug. So that was an illegal. It was, I don't even know which year it was prohibited, but it was done away with. That went away. And that was termed mouse trapping.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's why the gear that we had to deal with that. So what we did is made sure that the guys are not going to lose the gear.
Yeah.
And you know what? You're going to lose a $5 jug and an iron, but when a piece of gear costs you $300 to $500, you're not going to lose it.
Right.
Especially if it has your name on it.
Yeah, and also in the sustainable concern, you don't want your gear just drifting off and
it can't
losing that stuff.
It can't. But I think that it's a lot easier for those bad apples out there to leave a piece of gear when it doesn't cost anything.
Yeah.
But that's a lot of incentive to keep everything tidy when it's worth something. And also having your name on it's kind of your vessel name. That's kind of a deterrent for losing gear.
So you got the idea of doing the commercial deep dropping, and how did you learn about, like, when you were coming up with like how you were going to create your gear? Did you go anywhere to kind of learn about deep dropping, or, how did that work?
I read up quite a bit. There's quite a bit of literature out there on different fisheries and fishery development. Read up about those different fisheries, especially that South Pacific fishery. There was a manual that was made a long time ago, and that was pretty interesting. Then I went to Florida a few times, fished with a few guys out there, learned a lot about those techniques. And then,
when is it? Like, when are we talking about?
Probably 2009.
Okay.
2010.
Okay.
So we got that award 2010. Had to do a lot of environmental consultation, they call it. So you just can't go and put gear out and say, I'm going to test the new swordfish fishery.
Right.
You have to go to the Pacific Council. You have to go to the Department of Fish and Wildlife, go to have the NOAA folks do what they call a consultation, make sure you're not going to impact anything, sign a bunch of documents, say you're not going to catch any turtles, whales. And then we started 2010, 11 and caught a few swordfish, which when we thought there were none around, which was kind of cool. And that's when it kind of started the ball rolling a little bit. We continued to tag swordfish. That's when we really started using it as a tagging technique, right? So every animal that comes up, we're able to measure it, put a tag in its back, really put it well in there. So we knew exactly it's right at the base of the dorsal fin. We know it's not going to come off like we see with all the fish. A lot of times tags pop off the animal just because we're jabbing them into the muscle just on the side. Yeah. Really need to go through the bone there.
And they can shed, like, I mean, we've found with marlin at least, and I'm sure you've found too, like, the fish are good at shedding tags.
Oh, yeah. I've got a video of one that we tagged with a harpoon up off of Monterey or San Francisco. The thing jumped 19 times on that tag in a row. Just boom, boom, went off into the sunset, constantly jumping. I mean, that was shot with a cell phone, so it's just see the splash, splash, splash on his back. He just took off. 2 days later, it popped off. That's what happens when they don't want it.
So you start the deep drop. You start exploring the deep drop stuff, and you're having success.
Moderate. We were catching a few fish, and the goal was to try to integrate this into our fishing community, because there was our fishing community is small for swordfish, and back in the 80s, we're 250 boats and a lot
harpoon boats.
Well, no, 250 net boats.
Oh, okay.
And then you had, like around 1978, you had over 1,000 registered harpoon boats. So you have, you have a lot of swordfish vessels. Now, in 2010, we were dealing with probably 25 drift net boats. So you're down to 10% of what it was, and almost just a handful of harpoon vessels.
That's a tough way to make a living, right?
It is. It's really tough. You know what? And I think that if swordfish were like every other product that we have out there, where it's worth something in the 70s and now it's a lot more valuable.
Yeah.
I mean, the sad part is sometimes these guys are telling me, I was getting $3 in 1978 and I'm still getting $3 now.
Just because of the foreign fish coming in.
Yeah, the imports. Yeah. They can bring it in for almost nothing. So that's one of the downsides. But we started working more and more with the fishing community. Like I said, it's a really small community. They need a job, and we buy the fish. We continue to buy it. The goal of my work was definitely never to displace the net, because the net has a lot of mechanisms there that make it go away if they're not clean.
Right.
The old net when we were kids, that might have been a different story. But now there's regulations. There's a book full of regulations on when they can set, with the size of the mesh, the depth of the mesh, the time of the year. So it's pretty well crafted. So my goal was to try to provide another option, mainly because during the summertime, there's no net fishing. Net fishing doesn't start till September. End of August. So during the summer, you're basically harpooning. And when you're harpooning, when they're not finning, that's painful.
Right.
You've been out there looking at your tournaments and looking for something when it's not there.
Yeah, it's a long day. You're burning your eyeballs and you're not seeing anything. It's tough.
Yeah.
Maybe this would be a good time to kind of explain why the deep drop fishing is so effective. It is because these fish, these swordfish, you're putting the bait where they're spending the bulk of their time, right?
Roger. Yeah.
And it seems like we've been talking about how rare it is to see a swordfish on the surface. When you know the fish are around, how often are the swordfish on the surface, and kind of explain like that whole process, like why are the fish down deep? What are they, a little bit about the swordfish.
Yeah. So swordfish, they come here to feed. Remember that I was mentioning, they're pigs. They could grow real fast. We'll talk about their age later, but they grow pretty fast. They're eating day and night. They're one of the few animals that's really focused, keyed in on eating day and night. So daytime, they sound right early morning. Right when the sun comes up, they start going down. They get down way below the thermocline. They can be scratching the bottom at 1,500 feet, or they could be mid-water column at 600 feet. They can be through that entire range. And they're hunting all of our deep scattering layer, the squids, the scatter layer. You hear guys talk scatter layer. I don't think a lot of guys know what a scatter layer is, except they see this fuzz on their depth finders. What is a scatter layer? So it's probably the biggest food source for especially pelagics on the planet. So it's a big, massive band of organisms. Everything from like these little tiny myctovids, like flashlight fish, to little hatchet fishes, to small squids, zooplankton. There's a lot, and it migrates. So this big band of food migrates up to the surface at night, and it goes deep during the day. It gets out of the way from the predators. So the swordfish are kind of they're doing like what any predator does, and they're just following the food, right? Yeah, but swordfish are kind of unique because they've got a ion brain heater. So they got a warm ion brain region. One of their eye muscles is modified to retain or generate and retain heat. So normally fish get cold. They're the same temperature as water, other than the tunas and the mako and the laminate sharks. But swordfish have an ion brain heater. A few of the tunas also have one. If you can keep your ion brain region warm, you're able to process information faster, twitch your contractility. You can move your eye quicker. You can respond faster to probably foraging and also getting away from things. And that's like what allows them to stay down deep. That coupled with their muscles are warm too. So you got ion brain and their red muscle, that little band. If you cut one in half, it kind of looks like a seagull. It's got these two wings of red muscle. A lot of guys will say, it's the bloodline. That's the red muscle. That's the slow muscle that's used for sustained swimming, like slow-powered swimming. Okay. So they use that muscle. That muscle stays warm also. Okay. And some of our work at PIER is focused on examining that muscle, taking temperature measurements at depth, and really quantifying that they can elevate temperature. So they can stay warm. What is the temperature like down at 1,000 feet? 7 to 9 degrees Celsius. So I don't know. We can break out a calculator, but it's probably 47 to 53 or something like that. That's cold. Yeah, 47, 48. Does that fluctuate like year round? Not much. Okay. It's pretty stable down there. What does fluctuate is our mixed layer. So from the thermocline up to the surface, we may see that change over the season. You can see little hot spots form just from the sun. But that water down there it's pretty frigid all the time. They can handle it. So a lot of fish can't handle it. What we see makos and a lot of other. So first off, I'm going to say a few fish, and then you're going to say, well, what about this one? Because they can all have exceptions. Yeah. But in general, we see like striped marlin. They basically hang out in that warm upper surface water. They may take a dive or two, go down and chase some food, but they can't handle it, and they come right back up to the surface. Because they don't have the brain heater. Some of the billfish do, but not to the extent like a swordfish. The swordfish is a tuned up, really warm animal, and they can handle it. It's not just that they can. And the eyes. Yeah, they got the big eyes, right? Got a monster eye. They can see really well at depth. A lot of work's been done on swordfish eye, and it's thought that they can't see really that well in high light conditions. So they're pretty blind at the surface. Have you ever seen one just try to swing at a bait? I've seen them like whiffing. You're like, come on, it's right there. Just eat it. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that they don't see that well when the high, especially when the sun's right overhead.
Right. And I guess like, since you brought it up, when they're on the surface, when guys, the traditional way to catch a swordfish around here, the hard way has been, guy sees one, okay, we got one, cruise up, toss a mackerel, and 99.9% of the time, the thing is over it and sinks out or
slowly swims away,
or maybe gives it a circle and
gets tangled up, gets snagged on the side. That happens a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's because these fish, when they're on the surface, they're not hunting.
They're not hunting. I mean, I have seen one or two in my life. I've seen them around a kelp where they're trying to eat a bait and like swinging around. That's the one. You want to pitch a mackerel at that one.
Interesting.
That one's ready to eat.
Okay.
But for the most part, you can tell, especially if they're in a slow circle, they're not feeding. They're not feeding the surface. They're probably, we don't know all these things, but we build these hypotheses and we think we know what's going on from the data. We think they're coming up, warming up, speed up digestion. Pilots always tell you they're going to take a crap before they go down. So these things happen, and they happen over and over and over again. So there's probably something to it. Then they go down, feed during the day, and then they come up at night, and then they're feeding at night up in the top. That's where all of our shallow set longline fisheries happen. That's probably the biggest fishery in the world is a shallow set longline fishery. It happens in every ocean basin, and that's almost always at night, shallow. So, and that's where you get a lot of other species too. It's kind of a mixed bag. Put hooks up at the surface at night, you never know what you're going to catch.
So swordfish, they're around here, at least Southern California bite. They're most zoned in or zoned in on squid is like kind of their favorite thing to eat, or like in the scatter layer, like when you're, checking out the stomach contents on these swords, like, are you primarily seeing squid or what are some of the other fish that you've like major things that I know they eat anything?
Yeah, Roger. I was going to say.
Yeah, like what are some of the things you've found in these fish?
Usually you almost always find some squid or beaks. They really like market squid, our bait squid that we use for Seabass around the islands. They like to eat that. You'll see them gorged on that. They'll eat anchovies, sardines, mackerel, those big jack mackerel that once in a while show up on kelps.
Okay.
You'll see those in their guts. Found bonito in their guts. Just about anything. A lot of times deep water fish, these deep sea smelts they're called. You hardly ever see them. They're a part of that deep band down below there.
Yeah.
They're like a cigar. They look like a cigar. They have these big old goggle eyes.
I know guys were this year
mullet
and sand dabs.
Yep. They'll scratch the bottom there. You'll see sand dabs. I've seen sand dabs and mako sharks and a few other things. When the bottom's carpeted with them, they're probably pretty easy to take down.
So like a lot of the swordfish, when guys bring them up, they're dirty. Like, they got that like mud on them or whatever. Are they like sticking their bill? Are they using their bill? Like I've heard guys, I don't know if this is like not true or not, but I've heard that they will go down into the mud, scrape their bill around, trying to like get some of the stuff right off the bottom.
I don't doubt it at all. I mean, I've never seen one doing that. I have seen some video of them at depth around those oil rigs in the Gulf. They look like they're whipping around pretty quick. They're definitely using that bill.
Yeah.
You see those fish, some of the fish that we see from, especially the ones that migrate up from Mexico, a lot of times their bills are real beat up, like they're probably banging into rocks or something on the bottom.
Okay.
And a lot of times the fish that we see that kind of from the west, that we think at least, they'll have a real clean bill, nice and smooth.
Mm-hmm.
But they definitely go on the bottom. They want to go where there's a lot of food. They don't like going places where it's really hard making a living. Usually they'll go where there's a lot of, they're moving a long way. So they're traveling 4,000 miles to get here. They're not spending much time in areas where there's not much food.
When you're going out to do your deep set, like let's go through like a day for a deep set guy. When you get out to your zone, where you're going to go fish, what are you kind of clued in on? Are you focused on like I'm going to go to this spot? Or are you more like looking for water temperature? Like, are you looking on charts for water temperatures or?
So you want all the secrets, huh?
You don't need to. I'm not asking you to give away the exact spots, but give us a little something.
I mean, I think you got to take it all in. I think that we're real good predators, and I get reminded of this all the time. A lot of times we don't even know exactly what we're looking for, but you're in the right place at the right time, and you can almost feel it. Mm-hmm. And I think that happens a lot because we do see these fish move around a lot. They're not stuck to one stone. They can definitely move a lot of times 20 miles in a night, even when they're feeding, even when they're in the bite here. Mm-hmm. So generally speaking, you just look for areas of life. That's just like everything else. One
thing I've noticed when I've been out fishing is like I've seen some of the buoy gear guys, they're just kind of set up in a random spot. It's not always on the high spot, like where a lot of the new recreational guys, it's like, let's go to the Avalon Bank or the 152.
That's probably the reason why you don't see the guys.
Yeah,
they're like, man, I don't want to bump into. I mean, believe it or not, our commercial fleet, they really do try to stay away from the recreational fleet. They don't want to have this interaction or a weird interaction. So a lot of times they do avoid them.
I guess I'm wondering, are these Southern California guys, are we stuck with the mindset of marlin fishing where it's like these fish just hang around the high spots? Or with swordfish, is it more important to just find the scatter layer?
Well, I think it depends year to year. Year to year, definitely. And every fisherman's going to have a different opinion. Mm-hmm. But a lot of times those high spots are productive places, and that's where you're going to find bait and food all the time. That's why most folks always go straight to the high spots. You got a highway, basically. And right here in Southern California, we only have so many productive ones, right? It's not always set up perfectly. They're all the high spots looking like they got, good clean water or warm water or dirty water, whatever you're looking for. So I think that high spot fishing is probably, it's never going to change. I mean, that's where you're going to go, and that's where you can kind of count on seeing some life. Those areas actually work to aggregate prey, so it's always going to be a good place to start.
What would be the ideal conditions for swordfish? If you're looking for a sign, you got the scatter layer. Does surface activity matter at all, like birds and stuff like that?
It all depends, man. Yeah. It all depends year to year.
There's no exact thing. It's not
no. That's what's challenging, and that's what everybody's going to find out this year. A lot of guys had luck. They had luck going back to the same spot every time, which is fantastic, but it doesn't happen that way all the time. And sometimes there are years where there's not much fish inside the bite. They're all outside. Once you get fish outside the Clemente, they can swing by and no one even knows. So we happen to have the perfect storm of conditions. You had your tournaments coming on right at the same time when we had some fish around. They were kind of parked in a few spots. That's what led to the craze. It really built it up. And then you had the social media gas on the thing and it fires up. But not every year is that way. You can ask our Harpoon or DGN fleet, or that's the drift net fleet. Every year is different.
I think you mentioned to me before once that in your tagging, if you tagged a swordfish on the Avalon Bank, it'll come back to the Avalon Bank.
It can. We don't see that with all of them, but we have some of them. And in one of the areas of concern is that's what happened in Australia. These guys had some fish that were coming back to the same banks and localized depletion. It doesn't mean you hit the whole stock, right?
Right.
But you hit those fish that actually came back to that little area. So they dried up some banks that were close enough for the recreational guys to go.
Okay.
And it was actually commercial and recreational pressure that did that. So that's one of the things we always have to consider when we think, oh, there's a lot of these things out there. Well, you know what? There might not be that many that are coming back through your neighborhood. So the last thing you want to do is take them all. And by no means am I always going to be preaching, oh, you need to let everything go. But
right.
There's only so many neighbors you have. We don't always need to have.
Yeah, I mean, I know you're hesitant to really preach about that, but I for sure am hoping that this year some of the guys the hardcore deep drop guys that have kind of come out of the woodwork will, after they get a couple for the freezer, and guys,
the neighbor's freezer,
yeah, and the neighbor's freezer and the cousin's freezer and everything. I really am hoping, and I want to promote that, after guys get a couple, they start to tag some of these fish and let them go, just like we do with other billfish. It'd be really cool to see. I know guys out in Florida, like Nick Stanzik, he tags a lot of fish, but the fishery is so new. It's like, I'm not going to let go of swordfish. Are you crazy?
Everybody's got blood. I told you earlier, everybody's got blood in their eyes right now. They want to stack them up. And I think that same thing happened. I remember seeing it happen with our thresher sharks a while ago. And I don't think it's going to go away, though. Swordfish, man, they're just such a prized catch. They're so that's why, our limits probably do need to get revisited. Yeah. And we need to start talking about conservation. And I do think that people need to understand, what? There's only so many that come into the bite. Population may be a lot larger than the white sea bass population, but you can still put a dent in it. I mean, there's two different stocks. And that's what our work right now is focused on, is looking at, we're putting a lot of dorsal fin tags on and seeing where they go and seeing when they come back.
That brings up something that I wanted to talk about. So the harpoon guys kind of they put away their gear this time of year. They ramp up as it gets closer to the summer, and then the fall is kind of the prime time. But, back to social media, you'll see these whale watching guys, and they're seeing fish all year round. So what's going on? Are there some fish that are here sticking around year round, or what have you learned from your tagging?
Well, the tagging data shows that the vast majority of them leave in the fall.
Okay.
Fall or early winter, I'd say.
Are they leaving because
it's time to spawn?
Spawning, okay.
It's time to spawn. Spawning happens probably anywhere from late February to May.
Okay.
And during those months, they don't all leave at the same time.
Right.
But they leave, and when they leave, they book it. So
where are they head? Where are they off to?
Southwest. We have fish that are going down to the tip of Baja, off of Cabo. We had recaptured the other day, just right down there below, outside of one of the banks there, Golden Gate or one of those banks. And we have a lot of fish that go towards Hawaii. And it's thought that there's a couple different stocks, and that's why they go in different directions. And that's the way they're managed currently. And they have been managed for at least the last 15 years, have been managed under a two-stock hypothesis. And it's thought that we're part of the Western and Central Pacific stock. And our fish should be going towards Hawaii. We have a lot of fish that actually go towards Mexico. And those fish that direction, that's a stock that is experiencing overfishing. It is a smaller stock. Turns out that most of our fish go that way. So we're working right now with managers to try to tag fish, figure out where they go. I do think that there's a lot of fish not a lot. There's some individuals that'll stay here, especially juveniles. We've had a couple smaller ones that hang throughout the winter.
Is that because they're not old enough yet to...
There's no cue to spawn, right? So as long as there's food present, they'll stick around because the temperature's not cold enough to drive them out of here. I think if we had a crazy winter where we rolled over to 56 or something, you might see them bail.
What size of swordfish do they need to get to when they can start reproducing?
Females probably around 180, 200 pounds.
Okay.
Is probably when they start thinking about it.
Okay.
It's probably a little bit larger. 225 pounds is probably when they start spawning. And the male's probably a smaller size. Most of the fish around this year were probably going to start spawning the next year. A lot of fish were probably averaging 130 pounds, 140 pounds.
Yeah, that was one of the things I wanted to ask you about. Was it seemed like a lot of the ones that were caught by the recreational guys were like 130 to 160 pound range, and then there was quite a few that were caught that were close to 300. There wasn't a lot of 250 pounders. It was weird. It was the 150s, a couple, then the 300s, but there was no 500 pounders caught, or
those are pretty rare.
Yeah. So, but you see a guy like Nick Stanzik out in Florida. He's out there every day, and he's probably the best recreational deep drop guy from at least my opinion. What is the distribution of weight around here? The commercial deep drop guys, how often are they getting a really mega one? It's
not often. Our stock extends all the way along the California coast. And what we've, if you look around other places in the world, other researchers, they've shown that, a lot of these bigger females will go to the higher latitude. So they're going above us.
Okay.
They're actually coming in above us, or they'll migrate further north. They can stand cooler temperatures. What we're seeing And it happens. You see a lot of fish, and the same thing happens with sea bass, right? So when a group comes in, they're all about the same size. They're all in that same cookie cutter size.
Right.
And that's what's been happening. A few years ago when we had the El Nino, there was a lot of really small ones. A lot of fish in the 40 to 50 pound size.
Of swordfish,
yeah.
Oh, wow.
And we even had a couple that were like 10, 12 pounds.
Oh, my God.
And those fish are, with that warmer water temperature, as we get closer down towards the equator, you see the smaller and smaller ones. However, on the spawning grounds, that's what you have off of Florida. They're fishing in a rookery where you have a combination of small individuals that are juveniles,
right?
And you have the big females and the males that are coming in there to spawn also. So that's,
okay,
that area, you're always going to have a mix of both big and small. That stock's pretty big. It's a lot larger than what we have out here. I don't know. It's really hard to compare the two. When I went out there, we saw smaller fish. We saw a lot of smaller fish. And here, I think you see a range. I mean, we see the occasional 400 pounder, and we see a lot of that mid-size.
Okay.
Yeah, which I think...
what's the biggest you've seen? Like, have you guys
biggest
caught?
One we've tagged is probably almost 500 pounds, probably, for something.
Have you heard of bigger than that?
Yeah, but not frequently.
Yeah.
They're pretty rare. They're pretty rare. When you get further north, there's definitely some large ones, but these stocks that we talk about, I mean, I think sometimes we're naive. We think that, we're just fishing on this virgin stock that no one's targeted. But right outside of our EEZ, you have a lot of different countries, a lot of them lined up, and there's a lot of gear in the water. So you don't have a lot of real old ones.
Do you guys, like with sea bass, we were talking earlier about, judging their age by their weight. Is it the same with swordfish? Has there been any like work done to age swordfish? Like
there's been a few different studies in the Pacific as well as the Atlantic and Mediterranean. It's a little more complicated because the males grow at a different rate than the females, but you really need to take the otolith out, that inner ear bone and count rings. And there's not been a lot of validation. We think they grow relatively quickly, probably start spawning 4, 5, 6 years old.
What's like a 300-pound swordfish?
I would say 6, 7.
Okay. 6,
7 around there, because they could put them before they're spawning. They could put on a lot of weight. We've had a few recaptures where we measured the animal, and then someone else recaptures it, and we actually get a good weight estimate. And we've seen them put on. They could put on 10 pounds a month when they're here feeding. We also see some individuals don't grow as fast. It's probably just because they didn't have all the resources. They weren't, didn't have a lot of food available. Or it could be that they got hurt in the tagging, who knows, or the angling. It's hard to say, but they grow relatively quickly.
How old can a swordfish get?
Most of the aging doesn't show them getting much older than 12, 13 years old.
Oh, wow. Marlin can live much older than that, right?
Yeah, and the thing is, the problem with swordfish is there's not a lot of validated studies. So validated means you actually have a way of knowing that the rings you're counting are 1-year rings.
Oh, right.
So what you need to do is, what we're hoping to do probably in the future is some of these fish that we're tagging, actually inject them with tetracycline so we can mark the otolith, and then we'll have an idea of exactly how old the animal is.
That's cool.
So I think right now, the aging, I mean, even though a bunch of different papers say different things, I think we have a good idea on the age at first maturity. We probably have a good idea of how old some of these new recruits are. But in terms of these old ones, what's a real old one? I don't think we know.
Yeah.
They look old.
Yeah.
They look ancient, man. That bill all beat up.
Yeah.
Big old eye looking at you, wrinkles.
So one thing that's kind of like got a lot of people talking, at least within the recreational circles, is how the mythos of the swordfish, the gladiator of the sea and all this, you hear these epic stories of ones that were hooked on the surface, guys fighting them for 12, 20 hours. There's stories, guys fighting them for 20 hours. But with the deep drop technique, I've heard a lot of guys talking about it's like, it's easy, or, they don't fight that much. And is that a physiological thing because of the fish coming up from the cold water to the warm water? Like, I've heard guys throw that around. I don't know if that's, BS, or what do you think? Like, when these fish are hooked down deep and they're brought up and what's going on with the fish? Like, why is it not fighting harder?
It's hard to say. I mean, because we really don't know. Can't climb into their head, but there's a couple things going on for sure. One, there's very little oxygen down there. So that's one of the reasons why you don't have a lot of the other predators down there. There's very little oxygen. They got these huge gills that are really good at sucking the oxygen out of the water. So when they start to struggle, they shoot for the surface. They get out of there. You can't struggle at that depth. You can't struggle at that depth. They rocket to the surface. That's why buoy gear, we were able to have a strike detector, and a lot of the groups are worried about fish spinning a lot, or non-targets like a seal or an elephant seal or something you catch at depth, spending a lot of time on the line. Things rocket to the surface. That's why our buoy pops up.
Okay.
And, so we're able to see they come up to the surface, and a lot of times I think that they are paying off that debt of being in a low O2 environment. So they're kind of recouping. They're
like
exhausted.
Reacclimating.
Yeah, and then you land them, right? And then you talk to some folks that say, oh, we had a couple shots.
Yeah.
And then now he's on the line for 4 hours because now he got in this groove, right?
Right.
So I don't know exactly what's happening, but I think the lack of oxygen at depth is one thing. And I do know that when you hook one at the surface, if they don't sound and they just kind of hang there, it can go on forever.
Yeah.
I mean, you can be on there for hours and hours and hours. And we don't see that happening a lot. I think you will. Those individuals that don't take advantage of the shot when the fish comes by the boat. But it's hard to say exactly what's happening.
Yeah. Another kind of like interesting thing that I think or phenomenon that we saw happen this year was you'd get like, say, a dozen boats on a spot, just use like whatever, the Avalon Bank, for example. And it would be like the old school Seabass thing where you get like a swim through. Everyone's kind of like anchored up on the spot, and all of a sudden, oh, he's bit. And then you're just waiting your turn, and then, you're bit. We saw that happen a few times with swordfish. You're looking around and like 3 or 4 boats are all bent at the same time. I think you called it like shoaling.
Yeah, when they group together.
Yeah. Obviously, we don't know everything that's going on with these fish, but I think, at least for myself, like I always envision these swordfish as kind of like solo fish. They're off on their own thing,
yeah.
But it's like, are they schooling up or what? Like,
no, it's because we grew up looking for one at the surface. And tell me the last time you found 2 or 3 flaggers in the same spot.
Yeah, no.
I've never seen that.
Right.
I've seen times where you see one here and there's another one. Someone sees one and the pair of gyros behind you, and you're like, oh my God, there's a lot of them here.
Yeah.
But for the most part, where we grow up learning about these animals by just seeing singles, and that's why we assume it's just a single. But I mean, you look at our drift net fishery, they use a small net. It's not that big. It's only 1 mile, and they catch fish in that 1 mile. That's why you're able to target them with a little bit of gear. When they get offshore, that whole schooling or shoaling or aggregating behavior that they do kind of breaks up, and they just get out there. And that's why you need 50 miles to target them when you're on the high seas. You need 50 miles of long line, because if you just had one line in one spot, or 10 lines in one spot like you do with buoy gear, it's really hard to get on them and catch more than one. And I think that's what's happening. But all this is relatively new, because this whole recreational behavior, our boats and the way that the guys are targeting them, that's all new. That's something that we're going to learn more and more about this next year.
What's presumably happening is there's quite a few fish down deep, say 1,000 feet, and they're feeding in the scatter layer or whatever, and they just are like coming into the zone.
That could be the case. It could be that they're there. I mean, how about sea bass? How many times have you seen sea bass on your meter and you're like, oh, they're here? All of a sudden, nothing happens, 10, 15 at night, or whenever you go to sleep, right?
Yeah.
Someone says, oh, yeah, I know them. And you're like, no, it's a bat ray. Go back to bed.
Yep.
And then you hear the tail just pa-pump, pa-pump, pa-pump. And you're like, oh, that is a sea bass.
Yeah.
And then everybody.
Or if it's me, it's a bat ray for sure.
Yeah. That's the same. We don't know if that's what's going on, or if it's, or if they're just moving into the area. I really don't know. Maybe they were deeper. Maybe they were shallower. It's hard to say.
And that brings up, another thing. Like, I didn't hear about a ton of guys catching big eye threshers or. This year there weren't that many around. So another thing, like another one of those things, like you hear through the grapevine, is that 1,000 feet, the threshers are at only like 800 feet.
That one I have some data.
Okay. So that's true.
No, it's the opposite. Yeah, it's the opposite. Actually, we've been tagging some big eye threshers, looking at survivorship, because the commercial fishermen, there's not a big market for the brown threshers or the big eye threshers, so a lot of them get released. And one of the questions is, well, if they're not going to make it, they ought to retain them. If you're sending them down to the bottom, just try to, in U.S. fisheries, we always try to minimize discards.
Right.
And utilize as much as possible. So we started tagging some big eye threshers 4 years ago. We've tagged about 30, and also looking at depth distribution to try to maybe avoid them a little bit.
Right.
And what we see is that they hang a little deeper typically than swordfish.
Oh, wow. Okay.
But they're right in the same ballpark. When I say deeper, they're not deep enough for you to avoid them.
Right.
They're right there. But I mean, they're basically in the same ballpark. We don't see them hanging a lot shallower. That's for sure.
So you think like this year, just not a lot of guys getting them was just an anomaly?
Well,
like you anticipate.
Oh yeah, we'll see more. There's some, and you're going to know it because when they fight very different. They usually will go down, and they'll load up the rod a lot more before instead of running up to the surface.
Right.
And then you'll have one that fakes you out and does both.
Good. That's something to look forward to.
Yeah, there's years where there's a lot of them around, especially warm water years. A few years ago, we had a lot of threshers. Like 1 out of every 4 commercial fish was a thresher. Something like that.
Is there anything else like bycatch, like guys that are deep dropping? They might.
Yeah, escalar for sure. You have
what's an escalar?
It's a deep water like snake mackerel. You know what? You'll see it sometimes in sushi restaurants called white tuna.
So it's edible.
It's edible. Yeah, you don't want to eat a lot of it.
Mercury?
No, it might slide you out of the chair.
What do you mean?
The flesh is really oily. That was this wax ester in the flesh, and it's actually goes through you just like oleine or whatever, one of those oil products. So it's something you're supposed to eat in small quantities.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and you have the oil fish, which is brevettis, which is also looks like a escalar. Pretty cool looking fish, but big bony scales on him.
How big are these fish?
I'd say anywhere. The ones I've seen are 20 to 80 pounds.
Oh, wow. So you get kind of big.
Yeah, 20, 70 pounds, 20, 60 pounds.
What do they look like physically? Like,
they have the little finlets back like a tuna back by the tail. And they're kind of slender, almost like a big barracuda. Kind of look like a cobia, if you've ever seen a cobia. Yeah. And they have a gnarly teeth.
Really?
Big eye, too. Yeah, real big eye.
Oh, rad.
You get catch those. You'll catch once in a while. You know what the guy's going to catch sometimes is mola molas.
Okay. Yeah. So mola.
They'll go down there, man. The mola mola, the sunfish. Yeah, they'll go straight down and slurp up your squid.
Really?
Yep.
That's crazy.
And you won't know what's going on. You'd be like, because they actually pull pretty hard.
Oh my God. I can't wait to see that happen. What about OPA?
Yep. You can definitely, certain years, there's a lot more OPA than others. This year there was not a lot of OPA around.
I didn't see anyone rod and reel get one.
Yeah.
At least I saw, but did you guys get very many? Not
very many. We caught a few, but up north when we were doing our tagging work above Point Conception up there above outside of Monterey. But for the most part, I don't know. I think it was OPA or something that we're going to see more and more about. I mean, you kind of see when they come through. We hear guys catching a few off of Salt Creek, and there's off of a kelp, or you'll watch the sport boats getting one here or two on a plunker stop. But that really didn't happen that much this year.
Is there a commercial fishery for OPA in California?
No, not in California. Other than our drift net fishery, which our drift net fishery caught, a little bit of everything. They caught threshers, swordfish, OPA, and a little bit of tuna. But for the most part, most of the OPA you see in the stores comes from long lining outside the EZ, so outside of 200 miles. We're going to try to work on targeting OPA a little bit better. We got a project that we're hoping to kick up looking at tagging OPA because we don't know anything about stock structure, and we're going to work with the managing partners to try to figure out a little more about that species to better manage it, because I do think it's going to play a role in this new deep set fishery going forward.
Yeah, so if a guy wanted to go out and target an OPA, are they going to fish it the same as like if they're going for a swordfish, or you want to be a little shallower or different bait? Or
it's hard to say exactly because we don't have very much tagging data for OPA. That's what we want to try to accumulate right now.
Yeah.
But in the past, we've seen them usually they're a little shallower, but not a lot shallower. And we've caught them down at depth as like swordfish depth as well. You get up north, we've caught them as deep or deeper than swordfish, but there are a couple different stocks of OPA. There's actually different species, a small eye and
oh, really?
I think there's 7 different species. And
Wow. Around here or like just in general?
In general, but in the Pacific, there's several different ones. And I said 7, but I've got to go. It's a colleague of mine's paper, so I should know this, but there's a lot. We predominantly have one around here, but there's a couple different ones we could catch, and we think that they behave differently. So some are deeper than others. Their eye size is different. There's a small eye one. There's a big eye one. There's a whole bunch of different ones, but they're all very, if you or I saw one next to each other, we'd say, oh, that's an Opa, because they all look the same, but there's small little differences.
One thing I've heard with Opa is like, oh, you can't eat Opa. They're infected with worms and
every fish has parasites, but Opa, they're a great eating fish. Especially, I think a lot of people get turned off on Opa because a lot of times they're sitting on a boat for 20 days, on these boats, and all of a sudden it's hitting the market, and then you're buying this product that may be kind of old, but you get a fresh Opa product. You go to Hawaii, you see it on a catch of the day. It's not old. It's a ruby red. It's a great fish, man. It's a beautiful. Only bad thing is from the commercial side, there's not a lot of yield. They have a really large bony plate, so you don't have like a lot of prime loin. A lot of it's kind of a bony structure, as well as some other cuts that are not so ideal. There's a lot of red meat too.
One thing that I'm interested in, I don't know what your opinion is on this, but why did it take so long for California fishermen to figure out the deep dropping? Like, guys came out here from, the booby trap guys came out here and, they had hookups to unknown whatever they hooked, but it really is only catching steam now. Like, why do you think that is?
I don't know. It's hard to say because there was a lot of effort, but it was really localized, right? There was an effort from a few individuals. I mean, there's a few guys like, I don't know, Bill the Priest was trying for a long time there early on. There was a few other guys who were trying hard, and a couple guys caught fish, but they caught really intermittent.
Yeah.
It's hard to go out there and spend a lot of time when you don't know what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. I think that this year conditions were just right. Fish were in the right place. We didn't have a lot of predation. So the predation is other big squids, especially like Tucidicus, those big red devils, the big Humboldt squids.
Yeah.
When they come through, they'll wipe out your baits really quick. Yeah. So, when you have that happen, which happened a few years ago, it can change things real quick.
That would be hard to...
Yeah, just imagine sitting all day long and then you reel up, there's no bait there.
Yeah,
I didn't even see a bite.
Right.
Yeah, so that can discourage you really quick. It's hard to say. I know that we started the trials in 2010. The commercial fishing trial started in 2015. It just, buoy gear and link buoy gear just got authorized by the Pacific Council in 2019 in September. So,
and the linked buoy gear, I've heard that mentioned. Yeah, what exactly is that?
It's very similar. They're using the same techniques, but when it's really windy or above Point Conception or outside of Clemente, when you don't want to try to keep track of all your 10 individual flags, you can link them together.
Okay.
And it's using subsurface links so that we don't have to worry about tangling up turtles. There's no hooks up at the surface. Same principles, but it's just a different configuration. Some guys like it better. Some guys like it worse. It's a little more work. It's probably better suited for a larger boat.
And are you guys on your gear? Are you fishing J hooks or circle hooks?
All circle hooks. We started out the trials early on with both J and circle hooks. Surprising thing is, we always thought, J hooks are going to be way better. And I was told by several different commercial fishermen that we were going to see what we saw, and it actually played out exactly like they mentioned.
Snagging them.
You hook more with a J hook, and you lose more with a J hook.
Right.
And you actually land more with a circle hook.
Okay.
The thing is, if anything comes up and swings at it, like a thresher shark, you use a circle hook, you get them in the mouth, you land the shark.
Yeah.
Or you get them to the boat. You use the J hook, you get them in the tail, you get them somewhere in the pec fin. Swordfish usually will get caught in the pec fin, side of the face, sometimes the eye, the bill. It'll stick right in the bill, and then when they come up to you and the windshield wiper next to the boat, you lose them. We voluntarily switched over to circle hooks. And it also aligns with all of the fishing effort for swordfish from any other U.S. vessel on the West Coast. Anybody fishing, they have to use a circle hook because if you do have an interaction with the turtle or an elephant seal, which is going to happen, the guys are going to catch an elephant seal or two.
Oh, man. Oh, boy.
I think that everybody's already pretty used to hooking
Seals.
sea lions, so there's no different, except they got a little more mass to them.
Right.
And they come up and they breathe, and it's pretty easy to get back down and cut the line pretty close.
Yeah.
Just don't want to cut the line with a weight attached to them, because then that would be a bummer.
Yeah. PSA. Cut the line close, guys. We do not want elephant seals with 5-pound weights hanging off them. I always get told, we should be using this J-hooks. I like the circle hooks better. I think they work just fine. If you gave me a choice, circle hook, and I wouldn't even look back. Are you guys predominantly using squid for bait?
It depends on what we have access to. Squid, mackerel.
So you will use mackerel also?
We'll use pretty much whatever's available. Sometimes squid's not always easy to buy.
Okay.
So whatever's available. Swordfish will pretty much probably eat anything. I think this year you'll see guys probably using all kinds of, maybe getting out there with chicken livers and.
That was one thing I was wondering about, and it's another one of those things. Like, guys have been doing, there's the guys that have been doing it now for a few months, but there's already people saying, "Oh, that doesn't work." It's like, how do you know? Like, this has only been going on for such a short time, but you see a lot of guys on the East Coast use like the strip baits with a skirt and a strip bait, like a bonita belly or whatever. There's no reason that shouldn't work, right?
There's no reason it shouldn't work. I mean, a lot of times on the East Coast, I think that they use long, slender baits like that because they're eating a lot of these eels.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So you're kind of trying to match what they're eating here.
We don't have that here.
You have some that look very similar, but not the extent. Some of those fish on that East Coast are they're really focused in on that long, slender bait. And that's why those like hoagies and different worms will work.
Yeah, hoagie baits.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I don't know. It's kind of like Seabass fishing, where the second you say, this is never going to work.
Right.
What are you doing? You're breaking out the two-tailed scampi, the old school one, and you guys, like, you look at him weird, and then he hangs one, and you're like, wow.
Yeah, I mean, I think that already happened this year, where guys started off, just fishing a big squid, and then if you weren't running the glow skirt, then you weren't like in the game, like you're some kind of noob. And then I'm sure next year it'll be, you got to have this thing, disco light with, a rock cod colored skirt is the only thing getting bit. It should be interesting to see. Yeah.
We'll have to do another one of these at the end of next year to say, okay, what did we learn? We learned that there is no one recipe.
Right.
That there's a lot of different options.
Well, cool, Chugey. I appreciate you coming in. I think, we kind of did the deep dive on sorties and.
Yeah, no worries. Next one will be at Seabass. That'd be fun. Talk about Seabass. Probably.
Maybe this spring before
before it turns on
full speed.
This guy's already got the bug already right now, though. So
I know. If guys want to learn more about PIER and some of like the, get really, really deep on it, where's a good place to see some of your work and some of the papers you've put out?
If you go online, our website's probably a good place to start. We're right here in Oceanside. We got a new facility right there in the harbor, which is, puts our boat and our office right above the Sea Center there, which is a great location. Our website's just PIER.org, www.pier.org. That's a great place. There's a lot of council documents, a lot of stuff online. You type in swordfish and PIER, and you'll probably get more info than you want.
All right. Thanks, Chugey. I'll let you get back to it. And thanks for tuning in.